So last week I just saw, and I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed. Now I need to establish that coming out from the previous movie, I wasn't really expecting much under Sony's questionable guidance.
If you know what I'm talking about.
Like, I did enjoy the first movie and it did keep me invested into a sequel, but in retrospect, it isn't actually a well-crafted movie. It's kind of like one of those movies that's in a sense crap, but you still enjoy it anyway, probably because the main characters are the most enjoyable ones to watch and they're the ones with the most screen time, so GG I guess. But Venom Let There Be Carnage, it's a bit different, in a good way. I feel like most of the mistakes from the last movie, including the villain and some of the stuff they did with the characters, was definitely rectified in the sequel. And so let's take a quick look at some of those things, hence here we have my spoiler-free review of Venom Let There Be Carnage. If you're new around here, just subscribe, please. It'll do you a lot more good than if you don't. And also drop a like on this video and turn on notifications if you want to see more content. Alright, so let's begin with the stuff I liked. Now I don't even care about starting off with story or writing, let's just get right to the real deal here. Carnage. Probably the most important thing about this movie is its villain. I mean, he's literally in the title of it. And so with that in mind, I thought this movie's representation of the villain was pretty nice for the most part. For starters, I really liked the design they went with, and like Venom, he looks super cool and beastly. I like how they gave him all these additional tentacles and claws in comparison to the naked version from the comics, and it does make him seem a lot bigger and more frightening than Venom. There were even times where it felt like Carnage's roars were shaking the cinema I was watching in because of how bellowing they were, and I was actually feeling pretty concerned for Venom. And the movie does benefit from that, considering that in the comics, Carnage is so strong that Venom had to actually team up with Spider-Man to stop him. So of course you'd expect this movie to understand that and portray Carnage as the much stronger one of the two. And it does. Carnage's violent and merciless personality also merges quite nicely with his host, a serial killer whose name I can't remember. And he was a decent villain as well. I mean, he wasn't great or anything, but the movie does actually make an effort to explain his motives and backstory, and even though it wasn't amazing, it was much better than what they did with Carlton Drake in the last movie. And that being said, the villains for Let There Be Carnage are much better than the villains for the first Venom. Unlike them, these guys actually do intimidate the audience and pose a serious threat to the main characters, and especially Venom. There's even a moment in the final battle, which I won't spoil, where for a brief moment the villains get the upper hand, and I was actually seriously worried that someone was going to die or if Venom was going to lose. We also have Shriek as a secondary villain, and she was alright. Going into the film I had never heard of the character of Shriek and had no idea who she was, so as a first-hand experience I wasn't too let down. I thought her backstory was quite depressing and her powers are pretty intense, but my favourite part about her character is how creepy she and Carnage were, which does make them legitimately threatening. And I've gotta say, I was actually shocked at how they took advantage of the 15 rating. Now if you live in the US or some other country that's not the UK, you'll think I'm a bit dumb to call this a 15. However, where I live, they did actually keep the R rating, and I'm glad they did so. Unlike what the last movie refused to do, this movie does actually include quite a bit of darkness and some pretty violent scenes. I mean sure, they're still afraid to show blood when Venom bites people's heads off. However, that doesn't account for the hundreds of lives that were lost during Carnage's couple-day reign. So yes, Carnage was great in this movie, and while not anywhere near the level of, say, Logan or even Deadpool, the movie does at the very least make an attempt to lean more towards the horror genre and less towards a kids' film. I would by no means call this a horror film, but I'd still consider it slightly darker than, say, The Incredible Hulk, which is mostly praised by Hulk fans for its darkness. I also assume that you all realise how goated the visuals for this film are already, so yeah. Moving on, I was very impressed at what they did with Venom and Eddie's characters. The best thing about the first film was definitely their bromance and character interactions, and it's no different here. I'd even argue the sequel does a better job at solidifying these two as one character than the first movie did, and part of that is due to the exploration of these two physically sharing the same body and the same life, and how that may cause tension between them. And I thought that was quite a nice choice to explore, and although there wasn't a definitive arc, it still did offer some character development to both Venom and Eddie, and made them more likeable than before. As usual, Tom Hardy does a great job with his performance, and the comedy between he and Venom is hilarious, especially when converged into day-to-day lifestyles and routines. And as for the other characters, they were alright. None of them were particularly memorable or special to say the least, but I did think the returning characters were definitely improved upon compared to the last movie, especially Eddie's girlfriend, although I did think it was weird that she is now engaged to his second boyfriend. Like, you'd think she'd want to be with Eddie after the events of the first movie, but apparently not. The film's music was actually pretty decent too. Definitely much better than the lackluster theme from the last movie, and I did heighten the intentness in a lot of the main action sequences, which is definitely a plus. And so yeah, that's all the stuff I liked about Venom 2. Now moving on to the things I didn't like about the movie, and fortunately there's not much. Now first off, this is also a problem with the first movie, it's just too short, like the runtime is not long enough. And as I mentioned just a few seconds ago, none of the characters outside of Venom, Eddie and Carnage are really that memorable or good. And as you'd expect, some of the jokes are a bit silly and unnecessary, which leads to drastic changes in tone. I also thought that Tom Hardy's performance, whilst good on the whole, there were a few times where I thought his acting was a little bit off, or weird to say the least. However, I don't know, that could just be what Eddie's personality is like. I also didn't buy Shriek's romantic relationship with Carnage. I just wasn't invested into the idea and found it to be a bit of a nuisance at times. And speaking of Carnage, the only thing I didn't really like about this version of the villain was how rushed his character was. I feel like even though his host was given enough screen time and development, the actual symbiote does kind of come out of nowhere and isn't given much of his own character like Venom does. But I mean, these are all just nitpicks to say the least and don't actually pose much of a problem for the film, so I still rate it about a 7 out of 10 and would consider it to be one of the better superhero films of 2021. At the end of the day, Carnage was still the perfect match for Venom and did pose a legitimate threat, thus seeing them clash out in the church was a lot of great fun. However, you want to know what's better than that? Well, let me just say you might want to stick around for the after credits, because it gets pretty wild from there. So yeah, that's my spoiler-free review for Venom Let There Be Carnage. Yeah guys, I'm pretty impressed by this one. It's by no means a smart or great movie, however it's definitely better than the last Venom movie and I would recommend it to pretty much anyone who likes Venom. I'm glad to see Sony's franchise continuing, and with Spider-Man No Way Home only a month away, things just couldn't get better. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. We plan to post more reviews like this, and with No Way Home around the corner, a ranking video may be in the mix. I also want to thank you all for 70k subscribers. This really means a lot and we're glad to see you enjoy our content. But yeah, until next time, stay cool and remember the motto.
We are Venom.